Internal chaos. The Ayatollah Lahuti showed tolerance towards the existence of all other parties, even atheists, because he believed that unity among the existing groups would strengthen the country's stand against Israel and the Christian world. In contrast, the mullahs' disunity would not only hinder the spread of the revolution, but would also disarm its goals. The Ayatollah Lahuti's logic directly opposed Islam in that Islam seeks to triumph and eradicate all other beliefs. His problem was that he was more nationalistic than the Ayatollah Khomeini, who preferred the nomadic and hostile culture of Saudi Arabia. The Ayatollah Lahuti was also not in favor of killing his fellow citizens because of infidelity. His values sharply contrasted with the commands of Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, who killed all his opponents in Saudi Arabia and only freed those who submitted to Islam and its army. The above-mentioned mullahs who opposed the Ayatollah Lahuti wanted to disarm him and remove him from any position or power, but he refused to step down. Soon after, he was mysteriously murdered. The injustices perpetrated by our revered leaders created tensions in Iran and disappointed and confused those of us who had contributed a lot towards the victory of the revolution and now were waiting to reap the fruits of our work. Alas, we were much younger, less experienced, and unaware of the bitterness of Islamic politics. We did not have a proficient knowledge of Islamic history. We had history courses, but these covered only a limited selection of subjects. We had not been taught that Arab emirs, caliphs, and Safavid, Afshar, and Qajar dynasties who ruled over Iran had degraded Iranian culture and persecuted their opponents and non-Muslims for the sake of radical Islam. We were raised to be largely illiterate concerning the political philosophies of the various Muslim groups in our history. Because of this, we were not able to discern the root of our country's problems, which was Islam. The Shah knew with Islam he would not be able to associate himself with the great kings of old, Cyrus and Darius. Instead, he put himself forward as a faithful Muslim to overcome the opposition of committed Muslims. He was not living according to the standards of Islam, but emphatically called himself a devoted Muslim. Because of his superficial proclamation, we were also calling ourselves Muslims proudly without knowing that Islamists hated our nation's democratic values. From the early grades, we were taught where the roots of our cultural identity came from and why we needed to be proud of it. However, we were never taught who had been posing threats to our national identity or what we needed to reject or embrace to protect our democratic values. These problems ran deep in our education and not only negatively affected us in making reasoned choices for our country's future, but kept us ignorant until we lost our country to its sworn enemies, the mullahs. The real enemy was hidden under political correctness. The strong values we adhered to, which kept the nation together, were vulnerable to the threats of Islam and eventually were belittled and dominated by Islamists. We felt confusion by the conflict between what we had perceived to be messages of democracy, peace, and hope for Iran, and what we were seeing after the revolution. Not only were the revolutionary mullahs eager to slaughter non-Muslims, but even their own devoted Muslim colleagues who opposed them. The swift political rise of the mullahs, which deprived their opponents of opportunities to react, incited hostile rejection. We were perplexed to observe that even seemingly small matters could cause bloodshed between Muslim leaders. The contention among Muslim religious leaders spread quickly to other religious and non-religious groups, and even to our military forces, causing widespread chaos. This chaotic atmosphere worked to the advantage of the mullahs, who knew that if they were to be successful in imposing Islam throughout Iran, they would have to create chaos first and then disarm their opponents quickly, no matter the costs. As a result, we were dismissed and exempted from fulfilling the remaining part of our 2-year commitment to the Iranian army. From Isfahan, I went to Tehran to find a suitable place to live and serve the revolution in my country if possible. The Ayatollah Khomeini had appointed Mr. Bazargan interim prime minister due to his popularity among the revolutionaries. However, he was not permitted to establish his cabinet members independently. Khomeini's close associates among the clergy put pressure on him and took part in his government despite their dislike of Bazargan's philosophy of running the country. Bazargan was a committed Muslim and the leader of the liberation movement, but the mullahs did not favor his nationalistic approach to governing the country. Even though they had junior roles in Bazargan's government, they gained more power than him due to their close relationship with Khomeini. They knew that it would not be easy for them to have major governmental roles over freedom-loving people. They took less important roles in order to change the atmosphere first, paving the ground for dominance in the future. They were clever enough to use Bazargan's milder philosophy as a channel for penetration and destruction so that in time they could establish their own theocratic government based on Sharia, the rigid Islamic principles. The seed of authoritarianism was sown during the time of Bazargan, and the battle for control won during the time of Dr. Bani Sadra. Both Bazargan and Bani Sadra knew how the mullahs betrayed the democracy pioneers in 1953, 26 years before the revolution of 1979, when the prime minister of that time, Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh, stood against the foreign policy of the Shah concerning oil and forced him to leave the country. Bazargan himself was a part of the democratic movement and also a member of Dr. Mossadegh's cabinet. He experienced the mullahs' betrayals personally in the way they first supported Dr. Mossadegh, but later withdrew, so he lost to the Shah. It was sad that he and Bani Sadra forgot or wanted to forget what the mullahs did to our country, and in this way misguided us. We also believed that the mullahs would never again deceive their nation, but they did. They used new acts of deception to gain power progressively. They hid their intention to creating a despotic government behind the false promises of Khomeini to establish democracy. While speaking pro-democratic language, the mullahs subtly encouraged their followers, not more than 2%, to challenge authorities in every organization in order to weaken Bazargan's government and create anarchy to pave the way for taking power. The students they controlled challenged their professors in the universities and caused the universities to close. The employees they controlled challenged the business managers, and many businesses closed down. Their ordinary followers also interfered with the lives of rank-and-file people who were not committed Muslims or non-Muslims. They pressed on until they established the religious police to make sure Islam permeated society at all levels, and the principles of Islam, Sharia, were in practice everywhere. With the establishment of the religious police and the Revolutionary Army, the highly equipped and respected army was relegated to second-rank status after the Revolutionary Army. Threats to lovers of democracy started to rise after this. They were humiliated and beaten in the streets, and no one was able to protect them. The mullahs were paving the ground to create more anarchy for the soon-to-be-held election. They hoped to make it easy to get their representative into the newly established Islamic parliament. Bazargan's goal was to establish an Islamic version of democracy in Iran, believing that Islam favored democracy. Like so many of us, Bazargan also did not understand that with Islam, it is impossible to establish a democracy. We were zealous Muslims, but we did not understand Islam fully and were unaware of its incompatibility with democracy. We always had limited access to Islamic sources, being shielded from gaining insight into our religion. The mindset was to blindly cling to the mullah's advice about every matter in Islam. Non-clerics had no right to adhere to any opinion based on their own personal understandings, as this could promote apostasy. We therefore blindly followed the Ayatollah Khomeini. Like many others, I knew on the one hand that in a democratic environment, people would have the freedom to challenge, question, reject, or accept willingly. We learned from our studies in universities and from common sense that a perfect model of democracy does not use force. It is perfect because of its superior and practical values. All other models or beliefs will perish if that which is perfect is at work. On the other hand, I was also taught to believe Islam was the last and perfect religion, come to finish the incomplete works of other prophets before Muhammad. We expected that Islam's perfection would manifest itself in peacefulness, and that other religions would simply cease to exist because of Islam's irresistible attraction. We were taught that people in ancient Saudi Arabia rejected Islam since they did not know how to deal with perfect Islam. Allah had required an absolute allegiance to Muhammad without question since he was the prophet of the perfect Islam. They believed one had no place questioning the perfect. To challenge Islam or Muhammad carried a death sentence. The Ayatollah Khomeini's promise of freedom caused me, like many others, to believe that he would not force us to follow the ancient authoritarianism of Muhammad. Muhammad forced others to follow him because his contemporaries were ignorant or jahil and uneducated. We were educated and lived in an educated and civilized area, and we were able to listen, evaluate, and choose the best. The mullahs persuaded us of this before the 1979 revolution. The narrative changed, however, when the Ayatollah gained power after the revolution. Ayatollah Khomeini passed laws for anyone who rejected him, the one who was ruling in Muhammad's place, to be subjected to the same punishment which was applied in Muhammad's time. We all were transported back to Muhammad's ancient authoritarianism of the 7th century and treated like the ancient ignorant ones.